Now, this is a huge story in a world that makes sense. You all know that this world doesn't make sense. You all know our media is broken, and they will never focus on the things they should focus on. Their outrage meter is not calibrated properly. There's going to be more talk about, the royal family and how racist they are and how Harry's talking about his frostbitten dick and all that sort of stuff. That will get way more coverage than a story like this will ever get. But it shouldn't be like that. So the U.S. drops an average of 46 bombs a day. Sit on that for a minute. Why should the world see us as a force for peace? So the U.S. has dropped 337,000 bombs and missiles in 20 years. 337,000. Let me ask you all a question. How much do you think that cost? 337,000 bombs. And what else could we have put that money towards? And putting aside the actual financial cost of it, how many lives have been terminated as a result of this? And how many of those people were innocent? All right, let me give you some of the specifics. The Pentagon has finally published its first air power summary since President Biden took office nearly a year ago. These monthly reports have been published since 2007 to document the number of bombs and missiles dropped by U.S.-led air forces in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria since 2004. Okay, so by the way, pausing here for a second, this is not all the bombs we dropped. This is just Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Because a lot of people don't know this, but there's what's called a shadow war going on in Africa right now. We're bombing in Somalia, for example. We're aiding in the bombing of Yemen. Saudi Arabia is leading the charge on that one, but we're right there to help them and assist them. So there's still other countries that we're also bombing that are not included in this. So 46 bombs a day is a bare minimum. It is definitely more than that. They continue, but President Trump stopped publishing them after February 2020, shrouding continued U.S. bombing in secrecy. Okay. So this is interesting and something I recall back from the Trump era, that one of the things he did is he was like, we don't want to have any transparency at all. So just stop reporting on things that there are rules you have to report around. And so there are consequences to that. Well, now at least Biden brought back the transparency. That is certainly damning with faint praise. Over the past 20 years, as documented in the table below, U.S. and allied air forces have dropped more than 337,000 bombs and missiles on other countries. That's an average of 46 strikes per day for 20 years. This endless bombardment has not only been deadly and devastating for its victims, but it's broadly recognized as seriously undermining international peace and security and diminishing America's standing in the world. Yes, an important point to make about this, which nobody else will make, is if you believe in law and order, you have to be against this. Why? Because what we're doing is illegal under international law. What we're doing would get any other country dragged in front of the International Criminal Court, and there would be punishment. There would be consequences. But since we view ourselves as a nation above nations and not a nation among nations, we disregard. The U.S. government and political establishment have been remarkably successful at keeping the American public in the dark about the horrific consequences of these long-term campaigns of mass destruction, allowing them to maintain the illusion of U.S. militarism as a force for good in the world in their domestic political rhetoric. Yeah, and not only that, we wasted $7 trillion in Iraq when all is said and done. We've wasted over $2 trillion in Afghanistan. And again, a common refrain on both the left and the right is like, hey, why would we spend on all those things when, our country's kind of falling apart here? Our infrastructure is crumbling. We have tens of thousands of homeless veterans. We have over 400,000 homeless Americans. Maybe if we're prioritizing, that stuff should come first. Now, even in the face of the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan, they are doubling down on their success at selling this counterfactual narrative to the American public to reignite their Cold War with Russia and China, dramatically and predictably increasing the risk of nuclear war. Yeah. There was just a bill that was voted on yesterday that takes a more standoffish stance with China. And, look, isn't it curious that, so the war in Afghanistan is now officially over. All the boots on the ground are out of there. Now, that is a good thing, and Biden, I think, deserves credit for that. But how could it be we withdrew from Afghanistan, but the military budget went up? So wait, we ended one of our wars, and military spending went up? How is that even possible? Well, we know the answer. The Pentagon has failed 5 audits in a row. they can't account for 59% of their money. That's trillions of dollars missing. And nobody talks about it. Nobody cares. But again, anybody, from any ideological perspective, should be furious with that. Even if you're just a fiscal conservative and all you care about is dollars and cents, for the love of God, you should care about that. If you're a humanitarian and you care about innocent people being killed, as we all should, you should care about this stuff. The new air power summary data reveal that the United States has dropped another 3,246 bombs and missiles on Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, 2,068 under Trump and 1,178 under Biden since February 2020. The good news is that U.S. bombing of those three countries has significantly decreased from over the 12,000 bombs and missiles it dropped on them in 2019. In fact, since the withdrawal of U.S. occupation forces in Afghanistan in August, the U.S. military has officially conducted no airstrikes there and only dropped 13 bombs or missiles on Iraq and Syria, although this does not preclude additional unreported strikes by forces under CIA commander control. Okay, so now this is an important point too. So there was data that came out after Biden took office that he basically eliminated the drone war. He didn't fully get rid of it, but it dropped like 90-something%. And people were skeptical of that, I think rightly so to some extent, because, like I said, Trump changed the transparency rules. So if you're doing these bombings, you don't necessarily have to report it. So he could have just been continuing the drone war without reporting it. Well, now we know he's brought back the transparency rules. And with the new transparency rules, we are learning, no, Biden did indeed reduce the drone war massively. And so on that front, yet again, you got to give credit where credit is due. You can't be a political hack and be a narrative humper or be a terminal contrarian. You have to, the facts have to come first. So in the case of Biden, credit for getting the boots on the ground out of Afghanistan, credit for massively reducing the drone war like 90%. That's phenomenal. Now the downside is, of course, he's starving the country of Afghanistan. He's starving them. So he is stealing their own money from them and not allowing them to use it because, of course, it's the Taliban government. But as a direct result of that, you have innocent people who are starving there. So it's billions of dollars, and the reason why he doesn't want to give their own money back to them is because it's the Taliban government. And he knows if he releases those funds, then the Republicans are going to scream and shout and say, Joe Biden is funding the Taliban. And so he wants to avoid that political war here at home and that easy talking point for Republicans, so he'd rather let innocent people starve. And so that's the part that deserves massive condemnation, because in some ways that's like even worse than the war. Trump and Biden both deserve credit for recognizing that endless bombing and occupation could not deliver victory in Afghanistan. The speed with which the U.S. installed government fell to the Taliban once the U.S. withdrawal was underway confirmed that 20 years of hostile military occupation, aerial bombardment, and support for corrupt governments ultimately served only to drive the war-weary people of Afghanistan back to Taliban rule. Biden's callous decision to follow 20 years of colonial occupation and aerial bombardment in Afghanistan with the same kind of brutal economic siege warfare the United States has inflicted on Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela can only further discredit America in the eyes of the world. There has been no accountability for these 20 years of senseless destruction, even with the publication of air power summaries. The ugly reality of U.S. bombing wars and the mass casualties they inflict remain largely hidden from the American public. Okay, so this article goes on here. You guys can check out the whole thing if you want. It's over at Salon. It's written by Medea Benjamin. She's of Code Pink, this anti-war group. But let that fact stick with you, man. 46 bombs a day. 337,000 bombs and missiles in 20 years. And this is undercounting because it doesn't even include all the countries that we are bombing. So never let anybody hit you with like, how are we going to pay for it? When talking about childcare, when talking about healthcare, when talking about education like free college or eliminating student loan debt or eliminating medical debt. Never let anybody bring that up. And also, never let anybody dupe you into thinking, oh, we're just the world police, and all 46 bombs a day were bombs of love, were bombs to help fix these countries. No, that's not how it works. Every imperialist power throughout history has lied to themselves and said, oh, we're the good people doing these things with the good values in mind, so since we mean well, it doesn't count as bad, it's actually good. And that is massive, massive self-delusion.